The general authorized one shot just to humiliate her. A 12-year-old girl in discount sneakers carrying a battered rifle case had no business on Fort Sterling's elite firing range, where senators and contractors came to play soldier for the cameras. When Sophie Dalton stepped to the firing line, the laughter was cruel and loud. General Maxwell Kingsley smirked, already composing the condescending speech he'd give about respecting military tradition. Then Sophie fired. The laughter died when Kingsley saw the scorecard, because that shooting pattern hadn't been used since her grandfather, Colonel Henry Dalton, disappeared 6 months ago, taking evidence of a $20 million weapons theft with him to his grave. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The morning had started differently. Sophie sat in the passenger seat of her mother's 15-year-old Honda Civic, watching the pine trees blur past as they drove toward Fort Sterling. The rifle case lay across her lap, its leather cracked and faded to the color of old pennies. Her mother's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Laura Dalton hadn't said much since they left the trailer park 20 minutes ago. She wore her cleaning uniform under a thin jacket, the same gray polyester she wore every Tuesday and Thursday when she went to the Sterling estate. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun that made her look older than 34. The lines around her eyes had deepened in the 6 months since Sophie's grandfather died. Sophie traced her finger along the brass clasp of the rifle case. Inside was her grandfather's M40A3, the same rifle he'd used during 3 tours overseas. He'd taught her to shoot with it, starting when she was 8 years old. Not at Fort Sterling, of course. They'd used the civilian range outside town, the one with the rusted tin roof, and the owner who didn't ask questions as long as you paid cash and cleaned up your brass. Her mother finally spoke as they approached the base entrance. "You don't have to do this, baby." Sophie looked at her mother's profile. Laura was staring straight ahead, but her jaw was tight. "Grandpa said I should." "Your grandpa said a lot of things." Laura's voice was strained. He also said not to trust anyone wearing stars on their shoulders. The Honda slowed as they approached the guard station. Fort Sterling sprawled before them, a small city of beige buildings and manicured lawns. Flags snapped in the morning breeze. Soldiers in combat uniforms jogged in formation along the perimeter road, their cadence calls echoing off the concrete. Sophie had been on base before, of course. Her grandfather had lived in the NCO housing until his retirement, and even after, he'd kept his retiree privileges. She remembered visiting him in his small apartment, the walls covered with commendations and photos of men who looked hard and competent. He'd always had butterscotch candies in a bowl on his coffee table, and a pot of coffee that tasted like motor oil. A young MP stepped out of the guard shack. He was maybe 20, with a fresh haircut and a name tape that read Rodriguez. He leaned down to Laura's window, his expression polite but official. "Morning, ma'am." "ID and purpose of visit?" Laura handed over her dependent ID card, the one that identified her as the daughter of a retired colonel. "My daughter has a reservation at the range. Sophie Dalton." Rodriguez took the card and glanced at his clipboard. His eyebrows rose slightly. "The main firing range? The one up by the officers' club?" "Yes," Sophie said, leaning forward. "I called last week. Master Sergeant Vasquez said I could use my grandfather's range privileges." The guard looked at Sophie, really looked at her for the first time. He saw a skinny 12-year-old with blonde hair and a ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt from the local middle school. His gaze dropped to the rifle case in her lap, then back to her face. "You're Colonel Dalton's granddaughter?" Rodriguez's voice changed, became almost reverent. "Viper Dalton?" Sophie nodded. She was used to this reaction. Her grandfather had been a legend in certain circles, the kind of soldier other soldiers told stories about. He'd earned the nickname Viper during the Gulf War, though he'd never told Sophie the exact story. Just smiled and said it had to do with patience and striking when the moment was right. Rodriguez handed back the ID card. "Your grandfather was a good man, miss. I'm sorry for your loss." He waved them through without checking the trunk or running the mirror under the chassis. "Range is building 17. You know the way?" Laura nodded and drove through the gate. Sophie watched in the side mirror as Rodriguez returned to his shack, already reaching for his phone. She wondered who he was calling. The base looked different than Sophie remembered. Cleaner, maybe. More polished. They passed the commissary and the Post Exchange, the movie theater, that showed films 3 months after they left regular theaters. Groups of soldiers walked along the sidewalks, some in uniform, others in PT gear. A few officers in their Class A uniforms strode toward the headquarters building, looking important and rushed. Laura turned onto a narrower road that wound up a gentle hill. The buildings here were newer, brick instead of the old concrete blocks. They passed the officers' club, a sprawling structure with white columns and a parking lot full of expensive cars. A banner hung over the entrance. "Welcome Defense Appropriations Committee." Sophie felt her stomach tighten. "Mom, why are there so many fancy cars here?" Laura's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Senator Sterling is hosting some kind of event, showing off for his friends." She glanced at Sophie. "Mrs. Sterling mentioned it yesterday while I was cleaning her bathroom. She was very excited about the general giving shooting demonstrations." The firing range complex sat at the top of the hill, a series of long buildings with reinforced walls and observation towers. The main range was an outdoor facility with covered shooting positions and electronic target systems that stretched 300 yards into a carefully maintained field. Everything was pristine, from the fresh paint on the safety barriers to the perfectly raked gravel. Laura pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the tick of the cooling engine and the distant crack of gunfire from one of the practice ranges. "You really want to do this?" Laura asked quietly. Sophie looked at the rifle case. Inside, tucked into the small zippered pocket, was the envelope her grandfather had given her 2 weeks before he died. He'd been in the hospital then, his body failing but his mind still sharp. He'd pressed the envelope into her hands and made her promise not to open it until she was at the range. "I promised Grandpa," Sophie said. Laura closed her eyes. "I know you did, baby, but promises to the dead can be dangerous." She opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. "Your grandfather loved you very much, but he also had enemies. Powerful enemies. Like General Kingsley?" Laura flinched at the name. She'd worked at the Sterling estate for 3 years, long enough to overhear conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Long enough to understand that Senator Sterling and General Kingsley were more than just colleagues. They were partners in something darker. "Just be careful," Laura finally said, "and if anything feels wrong, you walk away, you hear me?" Sophie nodded and opened the car door. The morning air was crisp and smelled of gun oil and freshly cut grass. She lifted the rifle case carefully, feeling its familiar weight. Her mother got out and walked around to her side. Together they approached the range building. The entrance was marked with a sign that read, "Fort Sterling Marksmanship Excellence Center. Authorized personnel only." Through the glass doors, Sophie could see a spacious lobby with trophy cases and photographs of distinguished shooters. A woman in a staff sergeant's uniform sat behind a desk, typing on a computer. She looked up as they entered, her expression neutral. Her name tape read Vasquez, and Sophie recognized her voice from the phone call. "Help you?" Vasquez asked. "I'm Sophie Dalton. I called about using the range this morning." Vasquez's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. She studied Sophie with dark, intelligent eyes. "You're Colonel Dalton's granddaughter." It wasn't a question, but Sophie nodded anyway. Vasquez stood up. She was compact and muscular, with gray threading through her black hair. She walked around the desk and looked at the rifle case. "Is that the Colonel's M40? "Yes, ma'am." "I saw him shoot with that rifle once." Vasquez's expression softened slightly. "Competition at Quantico, 15 years ago. He put 10 rounds through a hole you could cover with a quarter at 300 yards. She paused. "He was the best I ever saw." Laura stepped forward. "We don't want to cause any trouble. If this is a bad time..." "It's a complicated time," Vasquez interrupted. She looked toward the interior door, where voices and laughter could be heard. "We have VIP visitors today. General Kingsley is hosting Senator Sterling and some defense contractors. They're using the main range for demonstrations." Sophie felt her resolve waver. "We can come back another day." "No," Vasquez's voice was firm. She looked at Sophie with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been something else. Something like recognition. Colonel Dalton made me promise something before he died. He said if his granddaughter ever came here, I should let her shoot, no matter what. Laura's face went pale. He came to see you? 3 days before he passed. Vasquez returned to her desk and pulled out a logbook, the old-fashioned kind with handwritten entries. He signed in right here, spent 4 hours on the range. Alone. She looked up. He shot a very specific pattern. I'd never seen anything like it. Sophie's heart was pounding now. What kind of pattern? Vasquez hesitated. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside was a single piece of paper with a target diagram. The bullet holes formed what looked like random groupings, but Sophie could see something else in the pattern. Numbers, maybe. Or coordinates. I don't know what it means, Vasquez admitted, but he told me to keep it. He said someone would come asking for it eventually. She looked at Sophie. I assume that someone is you. Before Sophie could respond, the interior door burst open. A man in an expensive suit strode into the lobby, followed by several others in business attire. At the center of the group was a tall, silver-haired man with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He wore 4 stars on his uniform collar. General Maxwell Kingsley had the kind of face that looked good in photographs. Strong jaw, clear blue eyes, a smile that suggested confidence and competence. But there was something cold behind that smile, something that reminded Sophie of the snakes her grandfather used to warn her about when they went hiking. Kingsley was in the middle of a story, his voice carrying across the lobby. So I told the Secretary of Defense, if we want readiness, we need to invest in next-generation optics systems. The technology has advanced significantly. He stopped when he saw Sophie and Laura. His gaze swept over them, categorizing and dismissing in a single glance. Laura in her cleaning uniform, Sophie with her discount store clothes, the battered rifle case that looked like it had survived a war. Senator Malcolm Sterling emerged from behind Kingsley. He was shorter, rounder, with the permanently flushed face of a man who enjoyed expensive wine. His eyes widened when he saw Laura. Laura? Sterling's voice held surprise and something else. Displeasure, maybe. What are you doing here? I thought you were cleaning the house today. Laura's back stiffened. It's Thursday, Senator. I clean on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Today is Saturday. Sterling's face reddened. Yes, well, Saturday. He gestured vaguely. This is unexpected. Mrs. Madeline Sterling appeared in the doorway, immaculate in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Laura made in a month. Her eyes narrowed when she saw her maid standing in the range lobby. Laura, dear, Madeline said with false sweetness. Surely you're not planning to shoot? The noise might be too much for your nerves. Before Laura could respond, a woman in expensive athletic wear stepped forward. Amanda Harrison had the kind of beauty that came from personal trainers and regular spa visits. She looked at Sophie with barely concealed amusement. Maxwell, is this part of the demonstration? Amanda asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Are we doing some kind of charity outreach? Inner-city youth marksmanship? Sophie felt heat rise to her face. We don't live in the inner city, we live in Riverside Meadows. The trailer park? Another woman, Alice Pemberton, laughed behind her hand. How quaint! General Kingsley held up a hand, still smiling. Ladies, please, this is a military installation. Everyone is welcome. He looked at Vasquez. Master Sergeant, are these guests cleared to use the range? Vasquez stood at attention. Yes, sir. Sophie Dalton has authorized access through her grandfather's retired personnel privileges, Colonel Henry Dalton. The name hung in the air. Several of the contractors exchanged glances. Kingsley smile didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes. Viper Dalton, Kingsley said softly. I heard about his passing. Tragic loss. He looked at Sophie with what might have been genuine interest or might have been calculation. You're his granddaughter? Yes, sir. And you know how to shoot? He taught me. Kingsley walked closer, his expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor. He looked at the rifle case. What are you carrying? His M40A3. A few of the military contractors perked up at that. One of them, Robert Harrison, Amanda's husband, stepped forward. That's a serious weapon for a child. I'm not a child, Sophie said. I'm 12. The lobby filled with polite laughter. Sophie felt her cheeks burning, but she kept her eyes on Kingsley. Her grandfather had taught her never to look away first. Predators respected eye contact. Kingsley studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled wider. "Tell you what, Miss Dalton, we were just about to start our demonstration. Why don't you join us? We can see what Colonel Dalton taught you." Laura grabbed Sophie's arm. "That's not necessary, General. We don't want to interrupt." "Nonsense," Kingsley interrupted smoothly. "This will be educational. For everyone." He looked at his guests. "How many of you have ever seen a 12-year-old shoot a military-grade sniper rifle?" No hands went up. "There you go," Kingsley said. "Entertainment value alone makes it worthwhile." He gestured toward the interior door. "After you, Miss Dalton." Sophie looked at her mother. Laura's face was tight with worry, but she nodded slightly. They'd come this far. Turning back now would only invite more mockery. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The group filed through the door into the main range facility. The space was enormous, climate-controlled and professionally lit. 10 shooting positions were arranged in a line, each with adjustable benches and electronic targeting systems. Large monitors displayed real-time data on bullet trajectories, wind conditions, and shot placement. Through the reinforced glass wall, Sophie could see the range itself. Target frames stood at intervals from 50 to 300 yards. The grass was perfectly maintained, the berms precisely engineered. This wasn't a place for amateurs. Captain Graham Mitchell, Kingsley's aide, was setting up demonstration equipment at Position 5. He was younger than the general, maybe 35, with the lean build of someone who ran every morning. He looked up as the group entered and immediately came to attention. "At ease, Captain," Kingsley said. "We have an unexpected addition to our demonstration. This is Sophie Dalton, Colonel Dalton's granddaughter. She'll be showing us what she's learned." Mitchell's eyes widened slightly. "Colonel Dalton? Viper Dalton?" "The same," Kingsley said. He turned to Sophie. "Captain Mitchell here is our range officer. He'll supervise your shooting. For safety, of course." Sophie set the rifle case on the bench at Position 1, the furthest from where the VIP guests were gathering. Her hands were steady as she unlatched the case. Inside, nestled in custom foam, was the M40A3. The rifle was beautiful in its simplicity. Matte black finish, Unertl scope, Harris bipod. Every surface showed signs of use, but also meticulous care. Laura stood behind her, close enough that Sophie could feel her mother's tension. Vasquez had followed the group in and now stood near the door, her expression unreadable. Sophie lifted the rifle out of the case. It was heavy, almost 10 pounds without ammunition. She'd grown stronger in the months since her grandfather died, partly from carrying the rifle to and from the civilian range, partly from the determination to honor his memory. Mitchell approached, his face professional. "I'll need to inspect the weapon, miss." Sophie handed it over without protest. She understood protocol. Mitchell examined the rifle with practiced efficiency, checking the chamber, the magazine well, the scope mounting. "It's clear," Mitchell announced. He handed it back. "Do you have ammunition?" Sophie reached into the case and pulled out a box of Federal 168-grain match ammunition. Her grandfather had left her 6 boxes, stored in his gun safe. Each box was precious. Mitchell took 5 rounds from the box. "We'll start with these. Standard safety protocols apply. Eye and ear protection mandatory. You'll shoot at the 100-yard target. 5 rounds, slow fire. Any questions?" "What's slow fire?" Amanda Harrison called from the observation area. She was seated in one of the comfortable chairs that had been arranged for the VIP guests. "Is that because children have slower reflexes?" More polite laughter. Sophie ignored it. She put on the safety glasses and ear protection that Mitchell handed her. The world became muffled, distant. It was just her and the rifle and the target downrange. The electronic system activated. On the monitor, a clean white target appeared at the 100-yard marker. Black circles radiated from a small bullseye. Standard NRA high-power rifle target. Sophie settled into the shooting position her grandfather had drilled into her, left hand under the forend, supporting the weight. Right hand on the pistol grip, finger outside the trigger guard, cheek welled against the stock, eye behind the scope. Deep breath in, slow breath out. She chambered the first round. The bolt moved smoothly, the action well-oiled. Through the scope, the target sprang into crystal clarity. She could see the individual fibers of the paper, the slight wavering from heat mirage. Behind her, Conversation continued. Senator Sterling was explaining something about budget allocations to Robert Harrison. Kingsley was making a joke about youth sports. The atmosphere was casual, dismissive. Sophie found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the body is perfectly still. Her finger moved to the trigger, taking up the slack. Gentle pressure, smooth and steady. The rifle fired. The recoil pushed back against her shoulder, familiar and manageable. Through the scope, she saw the target frame shake slightly. On the monitor, a red dot appeared. Not in the bullseye, not even in the 9-ring. The bullet had struck the edge of the target, barely on paper. The VIP guests erupted in laughter. Amanda Harrison actually applauded. "Well," Kingsley said loudly, "that's certainly a start. Perhaps we should." 4 more rounds, Sophie said quietly. Mitchell looked at her. "Are you sure? We can stop if—" 4 more rounds. Mitchell nodded. "Continue when ready." Sophie chambered the second round. This time she didn't think about the people behind her or their laughter. She thought about the envelope in the rifle case, still unopened. She thought about her grandfather's hands teaching her to read the wind by watching the grass. She thought about the pattern Vasquez had shown her. This wasn't about hitting the bullseye, this was about something else. She fired again. The second shot hit the 7-ring, opposite side from the first. Still not impressive, but deliberate. Mitchell frowned slightly. The third shot, 6-ring low and left. The fourth shot, 8-ring high and right. The guests had stopped paying attention now, returning to their conversations. Only Mitchell was watching the monitor, his frown deepening. Sophie chambered the 5th and final round. She adjusted her position slightly, accounting for the pattern she was creating. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Marksmanship isn't always about precision, Bug. Sometimes it's about communication." She fired. The last bullet struck the target in the 10-ring, not quite center but close. Mitchell stared at the monitor. The 5 shots formed a pattern that looked random to the untrained eye. But Mitchell had been a range officer for 8 years. He'd seen thousands of targets, and he'd also seen the classified briefing about Colonel Dalton's final range session. The pattern Sophie had just shot was identical. Mitchell's face went pale. He looked at Sophie, then at the rifle, then back at the monitor. His hand moved toward his radio, then stopped. Kingsley had noticed the silence. He walked over, still smiling. "How did our young shooter do, Captain?" Mitchell's voice was carefully neutral. 5 shots on target, sir. Mixed grouping." "Let's see." Kingsley looked at the monitor. His smile froze. For just a second, maybe 2, something flashed across his face. Recognition, fear. Then it was gone, replaced by the professional mask. "Interesting pattern," Kingsley said slowly. He looked at Sophie. "Did your grandfather teach you to shoot like that?" "Yes, sir." "And did he explain why?" Sophie met his eyes. He said, "Every shot tells a story." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vasquez had moved closer, her hand resting on her sidearm without seeming to realize it. Captain Mitchell stood very still, his eyes moving between Sophie and the general. Kingsley studied the monitor for a long moment. Then he laughed, the sound forced and too loud. "Well, that's certainly one way to shoot. Not particularly effective, but creative." He turned to his guests. "I think we've seen enough of the youth demonstration. Shall we proceed with the actual presentation?" But Sophie wasn't done. She reached into the rifle case and pulled out the envelope. Her hands were shaking now, but she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. On it, in her grandfather's handwriting, was a message. "Bug, if you're reading this, you fired the first pattern. There are 4 more. Their coordinates. The range master knows where to find the targets. Shoot them all, and the truth comes out. I'm sorry to put this on you, but you're the only one I trust. Love, Grandpa." Below the message were 4 sets of numbers. Sophie looked up at Mitchell. "I need to shoot at the 200-yard targets. Position 7, target 4. Mitchell's radio crackled. A voice said something about security protocols. He ignored it. "Why?" Mitchell asked quietly. "Because my grandfather asked me to." Kingsley stepped between them. "That's enough, Miss Dalton. You've had your fun. It's time to clear the range." "Colonel Dalton's privileges extend to all range positions," Vasquez said from the doorway, "including long-range targets." Kingsley turned to her, his smile gone. "Master Sergeant, you're dismissed." "With respect, sir, I'm the senior range NCO. I can't be dismissed during active shooting." The tension was electric now. Senator Sterling had stopped talking. The contractors were watching with confused interest. Mrs. Sterling had her phone out, probably texting her husband's staff. Laura moved forward and put her hand on Sophie's shoulder. "We should go, baby." But Sophie was looking at the monitor, at the pattern she'd created. 5 shots that looked random but weren't. She thought about her grandfather in the hospital, pressing that envelope into her hands. She thought about the way people had treated her mother for years, like furniture to be moved around. She thought about how quiet the base had been about Colonel Dalton's death. Heart attack, they said, natural causes, nothing suspicious. Except her grandfather had been the healthiest 70-year-old she'd ever known, and he'd spent his last afternoon at this range, shooting patterns that meant something. Sophie looked at General Kingsley. "My grandfather earned the right to use this range with 30 years of service. I have 4 more patterns to shoot. Are you going to stop me?" Kingsley's jaw tightened. Around him, the VIP guests were watching now, sensing drama. This could turn into a scene, the kind that made headlines. General prevents dead hero's granddaughter from honoring his memory. "Captain Mitchell," Kingsley said through clenched teeth, "escort Miss Dalton to position 7. Let's get this over with." Sophie picked up the rifle case. As she walked past Kingsley, he leaned down and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Your grandfather was a thief and a traitor. Whatever you think you're doing, it ends here." Sophie stopped. She looked up at the general, at his cold blue eyes, and she smiled, the same smile her grandfather used to give before winning an argument. "Then you won't mind if I keep shooting," she said. Position 7 sat at the far end of the range complex, separated from the VIP shooting stations by 100 feet of concrete walkway. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of cordite and cut grass. Sophie walked ahead of the group, her rifle case clutched against her chest, her mother's footsteps close behind. Captain Mitchell followed at a professional distance, his face unreadable. Behind him came General Kingsley and his entourage, their expensive shoes clicking against the pavement. The mood had shifted from amused condescension to something darker, more watchful. The shooting position was identical to the others in design, but positioned for longer distances. Heavy sandbags lined the bench rest. A spotting scope on a tripod pointed downrange. The electronic monitor here was larger, designed for precise reading of distant impacts. Sophie set her case down and opened it. Her fingers found the next set of coordinates from her grandfather's note. Position 7, target 4, 200 yards. She committed the numbers to memory, then tucked the paper back into the cases in her pocket. Mitchell moved to the control panel and activated the targeting system. Downrange, Sophie could see multiple target frames at the 200-yard line. The 4th frame held a standard silhouette target, the kind used for tactical shooting rather than precision competitions. Vasquez had followed the group and now stood near the observation area, her posture rigid. She caught Sophie's eye and gave the smallest nod, a gesture of encouragement or permission or maybe warning. General Kingsley positioned himself at the monitor, his hands clasped behind his back. 200 yards with iron sights would be impressive, he said conversationally. But you have a scope. This should be simple enough, even for a child. Sophie ignored the barb. She'd learned from her grandfather that some people talk to fill silence, to mask their own nervousness. She began setting up the rifle, her movements methodical. Bipod deployed, rifle settled on the sandbags, scope caps removed. Private First Class Ethan Price appeared from the equipment room, pushing a cart with additional ammunition and cleaning supplies. He was young, maybe 19. With the eager-to-please demeanor of someone fresh from basic training, he stopped when he saw the crowd. "Sir, I didn't know we had scheduled shooting," Price said to Mitchell. "Unscheduled demonstration," Mitchell replied. His voice was tight. "Return to your duties, Private." But Price was staring at Sophie's rifle. "Is that an M40A3? I thought those were phased out, except for—" He stopped, his eyes widening. "That's Colonel Dalton's rifle." The silence that followed was profound. Even the contractors, who'd been murmuring among themselves, went quiet. Senator Sterling cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private, Maxwell." Kingsley's smile was glacial. "Nonsense, this is a military installation, transparency in all things." He looked at Price. "Yes, Private. That's Colonel Dalton's rifle. His granddaughter is demonstrating his teaching methods. Fascinating, really. The colonel had some unorthodox approaches to marksmanship. Price looked confused. But sir, Colonel Dalton was one of the best instructors the Army ever had. His techniques are still taught at. That will be all, Private, Mitchell interrupted, his voice sharp. Price retreated, but Sophie saw him pull out his phone as he walked away. She wondered who he was texting. Laura stood beside the shooting bench, her arms wrapped around herself despite the mild temperature. Mrs. Sterling had positioned herself nearby, close enough to eavesdrop, her expression a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Your daughter certainly has confidence," Madeline Sterling said to Laura, her voice carrying. "I suppose that comes from not knowing any better. Ignorance can be such a blessing." Laura's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Sophie felt anger flash through her, hot and bright. She forced it down. Her grandfather had taught her that anger made hands shake, and shaking hands missed targets. She loaded 5 rounds into the rifle's internal magazine. The brass cartridges gleamed under the overhead lights. Each one represented her grandfather's final gift to her, ammunition he'd hand-selected and stored with care. Through the scope, the silhouette target appeared crisp and clear. The crosshairs settled on the center mass, right where a person's heart would be. Sophie's finger rested on the trigger guard, not yet ready to shoot. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Dalton," Kingsley said. "We don't have all day." Sophie closed her eyes briefly, remembering her grandfather's lessons. Long-range shooting wasn't just about aiming, it was about reading conditions. Wind speed and direction, air temperature, humidity, barometric pressure. All of it affected the bullet's flight path. She opened her eyes and looked at the flags positioned along the range. They hung limp, barely moving, light wind, maybe 3 miles per hour from the left. The temperature was 65 degrees. She'd fired in these conditions before. But this wasn't about precision, it was about pattern. She checked her grandfather's coordinates again. The numbers described specific points on the target, not the center mass. She'd have to aim deliberately off-center to hit them. The first shot needed to strike high right, at approximately the 2 o'clock position on the silhouette's head area. She adjusted her aim, compensating for the wind and the deliberate offset. Her breathing steadied, the world narrowed to the scope's view. She fired. The recoil was familiar, comfortable. The rifle settled back on the sandbags. On the monitor, a red dot appeared exactly where she'd aimed. High right, just outside the silhouette's outline. "Miss," Kingsley announced, completely off target. Mitchell was watching the monitor more carefully. His frown had returned. Sophie chambered the second round. This shot needed to hit low left, near the 7 o'clock position at the silhouette's hip level. She adjusted her point of aim and fired. Another red dot appeared, low left, precise. 2 misses. Robert Harrison called from the observation area. Perhaps military marksmanship requires more maturity than enthusiasm. Amanda Harrison laughed, the sound brittle. "Maybe she needs glasses. Does your insurance cover optometry, Laura?" Laura's hands had balled into fists. Vasquez took a step forward, her face dark with anger, but a warning glance from Mitchell stopped her. Sophie fired the third round. Center right, 9 o'clock position. Then the fourth, center left at 3 o'clock. The pattern was emerging on the monitor, visible to anyone who knew what to look for. Mitchell knew. He'd gone completely still, staring at the screen. Sophie chambered the 5th and final round. This one needed to hit dead center, right in the middle of the pattern. She took her time, feeling the rifle's balance, sensing the wind that wasn't there, trusting her training. The shot rang out. The bullet struck exactly center. On the monitor, 5 red dots formed a perfect plus sign, north, south, east, west, and center. It looked like a targeting reticle, or coordinates on a map. Mitchell's hand went to his radio. He pressed the transmit button, then released it without speaking. He looked at Kingsley, and Sophie saw fear in the captain's eyes. Kingsley stared at the monitor for a long moment. When he turned to face Sophie, his expression was carefully controlled, but his voice had an edge it hadn't held before. "Interesting shooting pattern, Miss Dalton. Though I'm not sure what you're trying to prove, those are all misses by any standard scoring system." "They're not misses," Sophie said quietly. "They're coordinates." The words hung in the air. Several of the VIP guests exchanged confused glances. Senator Sterling's face had gone red. "Coordinates to what?" Kingsley asked, his voice dangerously soft. Sophie pulled out her grandfather's note and read the next set of instructions. Position 3, target 2, 300 yards, that's the next pattern. Absolutely not, Kingsley snapped. He turned to Mitchell. Captain, this demonstration is over. Clear the range. Sir, Colonel Dalton's privileges, Vasquez began, are terminated, Kingsley finished. Effective immediately. Master Sergeant, you're relieved. Report to my office at 1400 hours. Vasquez's face went rigid. Sir, you can't unilaterally revoke a retired officer's range privileges without… I just did, Kingsley gestured to the two MPs who'd been standing by the entrance. Escort Miss Dalton and her mother off the base. They're no longer authorized visitors. The MPs approached, looking uncomfortable. One of them, Sergeant Brian Tucker, was older than most MPs, probably in his 50s. He'd been at Fort Sterling for decades. Sophie saw recognition in his eyes when he looked at her. Miss, you need to pack up your equipment, Tucker said gently. I'm sorry, but orders are orders. Laura moved to Sophie's side, her face pale. Come on, baby. We'll figure something else out. But Sophie was looking at the monitor, at the pattern she'd created. 5 points forming a cross. She thought about her grandfather's final days, the urgency in his voice when he'd given her the envelope, the way he'd made her promise to come here, to shoot these patterns. What are you hiding? Sophie asked Kingsley directly. The general's face went cold. I beg your pardon? My grandfather spent his last afternoon here shooting these same patterns, then he died 3 days later. Heart attack, they said. But he ran 5 miles every morning. He didn't have heart problems. Laura gasped. Sophie, don't! Colonel Dalton was 70 years old, Kingsley interrupted. Heart attacks happen. It's tragic, but natural. The patterns aren't natural, Sophie pressed. They mean something. That's why you're stopping me from finishing. Kingsley took a step closer, looming over her. Your grandfather was a decorated soldier who served honorably. Don't tarnish his memory with conspiracy theories. Now get off my base before I have you arrested for trespassing. Mitchell finally spoke up, his voice strained. Sir, perhaps we should review Colonel Dalton's final range session. The logbook is classified, Kingsley snapped, as are all records from that day. He looked at Vasquez. Isn't that right, Master Sergeant? Vasquez's jaw worked. Sir, the colonel was alone when he shot. I logged his session but didn't observe it directly. He had privacy privileges. Convenient, Kingsley said. So we have no record of what he actually did. Just the wild imagination of a grieving child. The words stung, meant to hurt. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her grandfather had taught her that crying was fine in private, but never in front of predators. Senator Sterling stepped forward, his politician's smile back in place. General, perhaps there's a compromise here. The child obviously misses her grandfather. Let her shoot one more pattern. What harm could it do? Then we can all move on with our day. Kingsley looked at Sterling sharply. Sophie saw something pass between them, a silent communication. Sterling gave the smallest nod. Fine, Kingsley said abruptly. One more pattern. Position 3, was it? 300 yards? He looked at Mitchell. Set it up, Captain. Let's finish this circus. Mitchell hesitated. Sir, 300 yards is expert-level distance. If she misses and hits the berm, we could have ricochets. Then make sure the range is clear, Kingsley ordered. And Captain, I want you personally observing. If anything looks irregular, you shut it down immediately. Understood? Yes, sir. As they walked to position 3, Sophie overheard Amanda Harrison whispering to her husband. Why is Malcolm letting this continue? I thought he wanted to get to the luncheon. Robert Harrison's response was too quiet to hear, but his expression was troubled. Position 3 had the longest sightline of any station on the range. The 300-yard targets were barely visible as dark rectangles against the distant berm. Professional shooters trained here, snipers and competitive marksmen, not 12-year-old girls in discount sneakers. Sophie set up her rifle again, her movements automatic now, muscle memory from hundreds of hours at the civilian range with her grandfather. He'd started her at 50 yards, gradually increasing the distance as her skills improved. 300 yards had been her maximum range, and even then, she'd struggled with consistency. But these weren't precision shots. They were deliberate placements, following her grandfather's coded instructions. Corporal Marcus Lee emerged from the range office, carrying a tablet and looking annoyed at being disturbed. He was responsible for maintaining all electronic records, every shot logged and stored in the system. He glanced at Sophie, then did a double take when he saw her rifle. "That's Colonel Dalton's M40, Lee said to no one in particular. He looked at Mitchell. "Sir, is this logged as a training session or demonstration?" "Just log it as facility use," Mitchell said tersely. "Under whose authorization code?" Mitchell paused. Every range session required an authorization code, usually from the supervising officer. But this wasn't official. It was barely tolerated. "Use mine," Vasquez said quietly. "I authorized the session this morning." Lee's eyebrows rose, but he made the notation on his tablet. "This is going to flag in the system. Unauthorized civilian use of quote." "It's not unauthorized," Vasquez interrupted. "Dependent privileges, properly documented." Lee shrugged and returned to the office, but Sophie saw him pull out his phone as he walked. More texts. More people being notified that something unusual was happening at the range. Through the scope, the 300-yard target looked impossibly small. Target 2 was a standard bullseye design, black circles on white paper. At this distance, wind and even the Earth's rotation could affect bullet placement. Sophie had never attempted a shot this precise under pressure. Her grandfather's coordinates called for a star pattern. 5 points arranged like the top of a Christmas tree. Upper left, upper right, center, lower left, lower right. She settled into position, trying to block out everything except the rifle and the target. But it was harder now. She could feel the weight of attention, the hostility radiating from Kingsley, the fear in her mother's presence. The first shot needed to hit upper left. She aimed carefully, compensating for wind and distance. Her finger pressed the trigger. The rifle fired. 300 yards away, a tiny puff of dirt erupted from the berm, well off target. "Complete miss," Kingsley announced with satisfaction. "Not even on paper." Sophie's heart sank. She'd miscalculated the wind, or the elevation, or both. At this distance, tiny errors became massive failures. Mitchell was at the spotting scope, tracking the bullet's impact. "Hold right 0.5, down 0.3, he said quietly. "Professional courtesy, one shooter helping another." Sophie nodded gratefully. She adjusted her aim and fired again. This time the bullet struck paper, upper left quadrant. 3 more shots followed, each one placed according to her grandfather's pattern. Upper right, center, lower left, lower right. When she fired the final round, her shoulder ached from recoil and her hands trembled slightly, but the pattern was complete. On the monitor, 5 hits formed a rough star shape. Not perfect, but recognizable to anyone who knew what to look for. Mitchell studied the screen for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and took a picture of the display. "Captain, what are you doing?" Kingsley demanded. "Documenting the session, sir. Standard protocol." "Delete that immediately." Mitchell looked at the general. Something in his expression had changed. "Sir, all range sessions are documented. It's regulations." "I don't care about regulations," Kingsley said, his voice rising. "Delete the photo, or I'll have you on report for insubordination." The VIP guests had gone quiet, sensing the tension. Senator Sterling touched Kingsley's arm. "Maxwell, perhaps we should." Kingsley shook him off. He strode to Mitchell and held out his hand. "Your phone, now." Mitchell's face was pale, but he held his ground. "Sir, I can't comply with that order." "Can't or won't?" "Both, sir." For a moment, Sophie thought Kingsley might hit him. The general's hands had balled into fists, his face red with fury. Then he seemed to remember where he was, who was watching. He forced a smile. "I see." Kingsley's voice was dangerous. "Captain Mitchell, you're relieved of duty pending investigation. Report to JAG by end of business today." Mitchell's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked at Sophie. "Good shooting, miss. Your grandfather would be proud." As Mitchell walked away, Kingsley turned to Sophie. "Happy now? You've cost a good officer his career with your games." Sophie felt guilt wash over her. She hadn't meant for Mitchell to get in trouble. She was just following her grandfather's instructions. Laura rushed forward and grabbed Sophie's shoulders. "That's enough. We're leaving. Right now." But Vasquez was staring at the monitor, her face thoughtful. "General, may I ask a question?" "What?" Kingsley snapped. Those patterns. The cross and the star, they look familiar. Where have I seen those before? Kingsley's expression went carefully blank. I have no idea what you're talking about. Range survey markers, Vasquez said slowly, working it out. We use crosses and stars to mark specific grid coordinates on the facility map. For maintenance and, she stopped, her eyes widening, and for marking storage locations. That's enough, Master Sergeant, Kingsley warned. But Vasquez wasn't listening. She pulled out her own phone and opened a mapping application. If I overlay these coordinates on the base map, they'd point to specific buildings. The cross pattern from 200 yards would be, she zoomed in on the screen. Building 14, the old ammunition bunker. Which is decommissioned, Kingsley said quickly. Empty, scheduled for demolition. And the star pattern from 300 yards would be, Vasquez's face went pale. That's Building 29. The equipment depot where we store optics and advanced targeting systems. Senator Sterling had moved closer, his politician's instincts sensing disaster. This is fascinating, truly, but I think we're reading too much into random bullet placement. The girl is talented, but not that precise. Sophie found her voice. I have 3 more patterns to shoot. They'll point to 3 more buildings. No, Kingsley said flatly. You're done. This ends here. Why? Sophie challenged. If they're just random buildings, what does it matter? Because you're disrupting military operations, Kingsley replied. Because you're creating a scene. Because I'm ordering you to stop. Laura pulled Sophie toward the exit. Come on, baby. We've pushed this far enough. But Sophie was looking at her grandfather's note, at the remaining coordinates. Position 8, target 1, 100 yards. Position 9, target 3, 250 yards. Position 10, target 5, 325 yards. 5 patterns total, 5 locations. Her grandfather had spent his final afternoon marking them, leaving a trail for someone to follow. What's in those buildings? Sophie asked Kingsley directly. What was my grandfather trying to show? Kingsley's face was stone. Security matters are classified. Even if I wanted to tell you, which I don't, I couldn't. Now get off my base, before I have you forcibly removed. Tucker and the other MP stepped forward, apologetic but firm. Miss, we really do need you to leave now. Sophie began packing her rifle. Her hands shook with frustration and anger. She'd gotten 2 patterns, 2 data points. Not enough. Not nearly enough to understand what her grandfather had been trying to reveal. As she closed the rifle case, Private Price reappeared, this time accompanied by a woman in captain's bars. The woman was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who didn't intimidate easily. General Kingsley, the woman said crisply. I'm Captain Melissa Vaughn, Public Affairs. I've received 3 separate calls in the last 15 minutes about an incident at the range involving Colonel Dalton's granddaughter. The press is asking questions. Kingsley's expression could have curdled milk. The press? How did they? He looked at Price, who suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Vaughn continued. Apparently someone posted photos on social media. A 12-year-old girl being escorted off base by MPs after honoring her deceased grandfather. The optics are, shall we say, unfortunate. Senator Sterling cursed under his breath. Amanda Harrison had her phone out, probably already seeing the posts spreading across her social feeds. This is a private matter, Kingsley said through gritted teeth. It became public when it hit Twitter 15 minutes ago, Vaughn replied. I've already had 2 reporters call, asking if the Army is preventing veterans, families from accessing base facilities. One of them mentioned Colonel Dalton by name and suggested his death might have been suspicious. Sophie's head snapped up. What? Vaughn looked at her with something like sympathy. There are questions about the circumstances. Anonymous tips to the media. Nothing concrete, but enough to generate interest. Anonymous tips from whom? Kingsley demanded. Unknown, sir, but the timing is certainly convenient. Vaughn glanced at her phone. I need to draft a statement. What's the official position? Kingsley was trapped, and everyone could see it. If he kicked Sophie off base now, it would look like suppression. If he let her continue, she'd complete her grandfather's pattern and reveal whatever secrets he was protecting. Senator Sterling pulled Kingsley aside, their voices low but urgent. Sophie caught fragments. disaster for the appropriations vote, and can't afford negative press, and find another way. After a tense conversation, Kingsley returned. His smile was back, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Dalton," he said formally, "I apologize for the confusion. Of course you're welcome to complete your tribute to Colonel Dalton. Family is important to the military community." The sudden reversal was jarring. Laura looked suspicious. Vasquez's eyes narrowed. "However," Kingsley continued, "for safety and scheduling reasons, you'll need to return tomorrow. We have VIP demonstrations scheduled for the rest of today. Report to Master Sergeant Vasquez at 0800 hours tomorrow morning. You'll have full access to complete your session." It was a delaying tactic, obviously. Give him time to remove evidence, alter records, prepare defenses. But it was also permission to continue. Sophie looked at her mother. Laura's face showed the internal war she was fighting. Fear for their safety versus justice for her father. Finally, she nodded slightly. "Tomorrow at 0800, Sophie agreed. "Excellent," Kingsley said. "Sergeant Tucker, please escort Miss Dalton and her mother to their vehicle. Ensure they have a visitor pass for tomorrow." As Sophie and Laura walked toward the parking lot, accompanied by Tucker, Sophie heard Kingsley's voice behind her. "Captain Vaughn, I want to know who leaked this to the press." "Find them." Tucker waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "Your grandfather was a good man, miss. Best NCO I ever served under, before he made officer." Sophie looked up at him. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough." Tucker glanced back toward the range building. "Well enough to know he didn't die of natural causes." Laura stopped walking. "What?" Tucker lowered his voice. "I was on duty the night they brought his body from his apartment. MPs were there before the ambulance. They searched the place, took boxes of stuff. That's not standard protocol for a heart attack." He looked at Sophie. "Whatever you're doing, be careful. The general doesn't like loose ends." They reached the Honda. As Tucker prepared the visitor pass for tomorrow, Sophie saw Captain Mitchell in the parking lot, talking on his phone. He saw her watching and gave a small salute before getting into his car. Vasquez appeared from the range building, walking quickly. She reached the Honda just as Tucker was handing over the pass. "Tomorrow morning, 0800, Vasquez confirmed. I'll be here. So will half the base, if the social media posts are accurate." She leaned closer. "Your grandfather gave me something else that day. I didn't understand it then, but I think I do now. It's at my house. Come there first, before the range. I'll text you the address." Before Sophie could respond, Vasquez walked away, her stride purposeful. Laura started the car, her hands tight on the wheel. They drove toward the gate in silence. As they passed the headquarters building, Sophie saw General Kingsley through a window. On his phone, his face red with anger. "Are we doing the right thing?" Laura asked quietly. Sophie thought about her grandfather's final days, the envelope he'd prepared, the patterns he'd shot, the urgency in his voice. "Grandpa wouldn't have asked me to do this if it wasn't important. It could cost me my job, it could cost us everything. We'll figure it out." Laura was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your grandfather used to say that sometimes the cost of silence is higher than the cost of speaking up." They passed through the gate. Private Rodriguez waved them through, but Sophie saw him watching in the rearview mirror, his phone to his ear. The story was spreading. By tomorrow, there would be no quiet resolution. Whatever her grandfather had hidden would either come to light or be buried forever. Sophie touched the rifle case in her lap. 3 more patterns, 3 more locations. Whatever happened, she would finish what her grandfather started, even if it cost everything. The trailer park looked different in the afternoon light. Smaller, somehow. More vulnerable. Laura parked the Honda in their narrow carport, next to the rusted propane tank that serviced their heating. The trailer itself was a single wide from the 1980s, its aluminum siding faded to a dull cream. Home for 12 years, ever since Laura's divorce. Sophie carried the rifle case inside, setting it carefully on the kitchen table. The space was cramped but clean, everything in its place because there was no room for clutter. 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom with a shower that only worked if you held the handle just right, and a combination living room and kitchen separated by a breakfast bar. Laura went straight to the refrigerator and pulled out a pitcher of water. Her hands shook as she poured 2 glasses. We need to talk about tomorrow, Laura said, not looking at Sophie. Really talk. Sophie sat at the table, her fingers tracing the rifle case's worn leather. I know it's dangerous. Dangerous doesn't cover it, baby. Laura finally turned, her eyes red-rimmed. That man, General Kingsley, he's not gonna just let you embarrass him. People like that, they protect themselves. They make problems disappear. Like Grandpa? The words hung between them. Laura's face crumpled slightly before she forced herself steady. She sat across from Sophie, wrapping both hands around her water glass. Your grandfather called me 2 days before he died, Laura said quietly. It was late, after 10. He never called that late. He said if anything happened to him, I should take you and leave. Go to my cousin in Ohio, start over. She swallowed hard. I thought he was being paranoid. He'd been acting strange for weeks, jumpy. I figured it was just old age catching up. What else did he say? That he'd made a mistake trusting the wrong people. That he'd tried to fix it, but the rot went too deep. Laura's voice cracked. He said he was sorry for what he was about to put us through, but someone had to stand up, someone had to say enough. Sophie felt tears building but pushed them back. Then we have to finish it. For him. At what cost? Laura stood abruptly, pacing the narrow space between the table and the counter. Mrs. Sterling called me while you were packing up at the range. She was very clear. If I don't control you, if I don't make you stop this nonsense, I'm fired. No severance. No reference. Nothing. The weight of that settled over Sophie. Her mother's job at the Sterling estate paid for everything. The lot rent, the utilities, the food. Without it, they'd have nothing. Maybe we should go to Ohio, Sophie said, though the words tasted like surrender. Laura stopped pacing. She looked at her daughter for a long moment, seeing something that made her expression shift. That's not what you want, is it? No. What do you want? Sophie thought about her grandfather's hands, teaching her to hold the rifle, his patience when she missed, his quiet pride when she improved. The way he'd looked at her in the hospital, eyes clear despite the pain, trusting her with something bigger than both of them. I want people to know the truth, Sophie said. Whatever Grandpa found, whatever he was trying to show, it matters. It mattered enough that he spent his last day marking it. It mattered enough that they killed him for it. Laura flinched at the word killed, but she didn't argue. She sat back down, reaching across the table to take Sophie's hands. Your grandfather was the bravest man I ever knew, Laura said. But bravery got him a funeral at 40% discount because we couldn't afford better. Bravery doesn't pay the electric bill, Sophie. I know, Mom. But, Laura continued, squeezing Sophie's hands tighter, neither does staying quiet while bad people do bad things. Your grandpa taught me that too. A knock at the door made them both jump. Laura moved to the window, peering through the thin curtain. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. It's Dorothy. Laura opened the door to reveal Mrs. Dorothy Barnes, her friend and fellow housekeeper. Dorothy was in her 50s, with iron-gray hair and the sturdy build of someone who'd spent decades on her knees scrubbing other people's floors. She carried a casserole dish covered in foil. Saw you come home, Dorothy said, pushing past Laura into the kitchen. Made too much lasagna, again. She set the dish on the stove, then turned to study Sophie. This the girl who's got the whole base in an uproar? Dorothy, I don't, Laura started. Oh, hush. I cleaned for Colonel Winters, remember? He was on the phone all afternoon with General Kingsley. Couldn't help overhearing. Dorothy pulled out a chair and sat, uninvited but welcome. They're terrified of you, child. Sophie blinked. Of me? Of what you represent. Questions. Accountability. Dorothy leaned forward. Colonel Winters, he's usually calm as milk. Today he was sweating through his uniform. Kept saying they needed to contain the situation before it metastasizes. That's a cancer word. They think you're a cancer. Laura looked stricken. Dorothy, if they find out you're talking to us, then I'll be fired too. So what? Dorothy's voice was fierce. I've been cleaning up after these people for 23 years. You know what I've learned? The powerful only stay powerful because people like us stay quiet. Well, I'm tired of quiet. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. Colonel Winters was on speakerphone for 2 of his calls. I recorded them. Not legally admissible, probably, but interesting nonetheless. Sophie's eyes widened. You recorded him? Didn't plan to, but when I heard him say Colonel Dalton's name, I started paying attention. Dorothy pressed play. Winter's voice emerged, tinny but clear. Doesn't matter what the girl thinks she knows. Dalton was a paranoid old man. If he'd really had evidence, he would have gone to CID. Another voice, Kingsley's. He was going to CID. That's why we had to accelerate the timeline. The documents are gone now, destroyed. All that's left are the range coordinates, and they don't prove anything without... The recording cut off with a rustle of fabric. That's when he noticed me in the room, Dorothy explained. Sent me away, but I heard enough. Laura had gone pale. They killed him. They actually killed him. Sounds like it, Dorothy agreed grimly. She looked at Sophie. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Before Sophie could answer, her mother's phone buzzed. Laura checked it, her face tightening. Text from Vasquez, her address and a message. Come now, bring the rifle. Dorothy stood. Then you'd better go. I'll stay here, make sure nobody comes snooping. And Laura, whatever happens tomorrow, you've got options. My daughter's law firm handles employment cases. Pro bono for friends. Laura hugged Dorothy fiercely. Thank you. 20 minutes later, Sophie and Laura pulled up to a modest ranch house in the base housing area reserved for senior NCOs. The lawn was immaculate, edged with military precision. An American flag hung from a pole by the front door. Vasquez answered before they could knock, ushering them inside quickly. She'd changed out of uniform into jeans and a sweatshirt, but her bearing remained ramrod straight. Lock it, Vasquez said, gesturing to the door. We don't have much time. The living room was sparse but comfortable. Photos covered one wall, military units spanning decades. Sophie recognized her grandfather in several of them, younger but unmistakable. Vasquez led them to a dining table where several items were laid out. A large base map, a notebook, and a sealed envelope with Sophie's grandfather's handwriting on it. He came here the night before his final range session. Vasquez began without preamble. I'd known Colonel Dalton for 18 years, served under him in Iraq. He saved my life during an ambush in Fallujah, took a round meant for me. She touched her left shoulder unconsciously. I owed him everything. She opened the notebook. Inside were sketches, calculations, and notes in her grandfather's precise handwriting. He told me he'd discovered a supply chain fraud. Millions of dollars in equipment ordered, paid for, but never delivered. The money disappeared into shell companies. Laura leaned over the notebook. How did he find out? He was volunteering at the base equipment depot, cataloging old inventory for disposal, found discrepancies. New targeting systems marked as delivered but not in storage. Night vision equipment, signed for but missing. He started tracking it, going through years of records. Vasquez pointed to the base map. The 5 locations your shooting patterns mark, they're all part of the fraud. Building 14, the old ammo bunker, was supposedly retrofitted for sensitive equipment storage. 10 million in upgrades, all documented and paid for. But when your grandfather checked, it's empty, hasn't been used in 5 years. Sophie stared at the map. So where's the equipment? Sold on the black market would be my guess. Or never purchased at all. The contractors bill the army. The army pays. Everyone in the chain gets their cut. And the equipment never exists. Vasquez's voice was bitter. Classic fraud. Happens more than you'd think. But 10 million? Laura said incredulously. How does that go unnoticed? Because the right people are signing off on it. Vasquez tapped the notebook. Colonel Dalton traced the approval signatures. Every fraudulent order went through General Kingsley's office. And every contract was awarded to companies connected to Senator Sterling. The implications crashed over Sophie. That's why they killed him. I can't prove that, Vasquez said carefully. But the day before he died, your grandfather submitted a formal complaint to the Criminal Investigation Division. He had documentation, photos, spreadsheets, everything needed to open an investigation. She paused. That evidence was supposed to be kept in a CID lockbox. But when I checked yesterday, using contacts I probably shouldn't have, the evidence locker was empty, everything gone. And the complaint itself was marked as resolved, unfounded. Laura was shaking. Someone destroyed it. Someone with access and authority, which narrows the suspect pool considerably. Vasquez opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a USB drive. "Your grandfather gave me this for safekeeping. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to whoever shot his patterns. He knew it would be you, Sophie. He trained you for this." Sophie took the drive with trembling fingers. "What's on it?" "I don't know. He said it was encrypted, that the password was something only family would know." "I never looked." Sophie turned the drive over in her palm. Her grandfather had been a private man, not given to sentimentality. What password would he use? Her birthday? Too obvious. His service number? Possibly. Then she remembered something. A word he'd called her, always. His nickname for her that nobody else used. "Bug," Sophie whispered. "He called me Bug." "Try it," Vasquez urged. They moved to Vasquez's computer. Sophie inserted the drive and typed the password Bug2012, combining the nickname with her birth year. The drive unlocked. Inside were folders, financial records, photographs, spreadsheets, email chains. Hundreds of documents, meticulously organized. Sophie clicked on a folder labeled Summary. A document opened, written in her grandfather's clear prose. It outlined 2 years of investigation, naming names and providing evidence. General Maxwell Kingsley, Senator Malcolm Sterling, Lieutenant Colonel James Rutherford, Colonel Bradley Winters, half a dozen contractors and shell companies. The fraud totaled $23 million over 5 years. But that wasn't all. The document continued, detailing how the conspiracy had expanded. False after-action reports to justify equipment losses. Falsified readiness assessments. Training exercises used as cover for equipment transfers. And at the bottom, in bold text, "I hereby swear that this information is true and accurate to the best of my knowledge. I understand that coming forward may cost me my life, but remaining silent costs me my honor. Colonel Henry Dalton, U.S. Army, retired." It was dated 4 days before his death. Laura was crying silently. Vasquez stood rigid, her jaw clenched. Sophie scrolled through more files, seeing the scope of what her grandfather had uncovered. He'd been thorough, anticipating every question, every challenge. This wasn't just evidence. This was a complete prosecutorial package. This is why he created the shooting patterns, Sophie realized. If the original evidence was destroyed, the patterns would prove he'd been here, shooting at specific coordinates. It would create questions, force people to investigate. "And it worked," Vasquez said. "You fired 2 patterns today. By tomorrow, those coordinates will be common knowledge, thanks to social media. People will start asking why those buildings matter." Laura wiped her eyes. "So we take this to the police, or the FBI, someone outside the base." "We could," Vasquez agreed, "but without the original evidence, and with the CID complaint marked unfounded, it becomes he said, she said. A dead man's accusations versus a decorated general and a sitting senator. Who do you think wins that fight?" Sophie understood. "We need the 3 remaining patterns. All 5 coordinates together prove Grandpa's investigation was real. And once I shoot them in front of witnesses, with the media watching, they can't suppress it." Vasquez nodded slowly. "It's risky. Kingsley will be prepared tomorrow. He'll have counter-moves planned." "Like what?" Laura asked fearfully. "Discrediting Sophie, claiming the USB drive is fabricated, maybe even arresting her for trespassing or interfering with military operations." Vasquez's expression was grim. "These are powerful men, Laura. They don't surrender power easily." A sound outside made them all freeze. A car door closing. Footsteps on the walkway. Vasquez moved to the window, peering through the blinds. Her posture relaxed marginally. "It's Captain Mitchell." She opened the door. Mitchell stood on the porch, out of uniform, wearing civilian clothes and looking exhausted. He glanced around nervously before stepping inside. "I've been relieved pending JAG review," Mitchell said without preamble, "but before I was escorted out, I made copies of today's range logs." He pulled out his phone. "Every shot Sophie fired is documented with timestamps and coordinates. It's official military record now, logged into the system before they could delete it." Vasquez actually smiled. "Smart?" "Not smart enough. They've already started the narrative that I falsified records to help a friend's granddaughter. Lieutenant Colonel Rutherford is handling my investigation personally." Mitchell's laugh was bitter. "Which means it's predetermined." "You didn't have to do this," Sophie said quietly. "You didn't have to risk your career." Mitchell looked at her, his expression serious. Yes, I did. I joined the army because I believed in something. Honor, integrity, service before self. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that careers and promotions aren't the point. Doing the right thing is. He paused. Your grandfather reminded me of that today, from beyond the grave. A moment of silence settled over the group. Then Vasquez spoke, her voice carrying command. We need a plan for tomorrow. They'll try to prevent Sophie from shooting. We need to ensure she gets those patterns completed, documented, and witnessed. The media will be there, Mitchell offered. Captain Vaughn said at least 3 news crews requested access. Kingsley can't deny them without looking worse. Then we use that, Vasquez said. Maximum transparency, every shot filmed, every coordinate broadcast. Make it impossible to suppress. Laura shook her head. They'll find a way. They always do. Not if we go public first, Sophie said. The idea was forming as she spoke. What if we release some of Grandpa's evidence tonight? Enough to create questions, but not everything. Let people start investigating on their own. Mitchell frowned. That could backfire. Give them time to create cover stories. Or it could force their hand, Vasquez countered. Make them react defensively instead of proactively. They're expecting us to play defense tomorrow. What if we attack first? They spent the next hour planning. Mitchell would send the range logs to 3 trusted contacts. A JAG officer he'd served with in Afghanistan, a military reporter known for investigative work, and a congressional staffer who handled defense oversight. Vasquez would pull the building maintenance records for all 5 locations Sophie's patterns indicated, creating an official paper trail that would be hard to erase. Sophie would prepare a statement, using her grandfather's words, explaining why she was completing his final range session. And Laura, after much internal debate, would record a video describing the threats from Mrs. Sterling, the pressure to stay silent. This is war, Vasquez said flatly. Information warfare. We fire first, we fire hard, and we don't give them time to mount a defense. By 10 o'clock that night, the first documents were circulating online. Mitchell's contact, a reporter named Sarah Jennings, published an article on her independent news site. Questions surround death of decorated Army colonel. The article laid out basic facts: Colonel Dalton's sudden death, his granddaughter's appearance at Fort Sterling, the unusual shooting patterns, the questions about missing equipment. Within an hour, it had been shared 3,000 times. Sophie lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her small room. Through the thin wall, she could hear her mother on the phone with Dorothy, their voices low and worried. Tomorrow would determine everything. Either her grandfather's evidence would force an investigation, bringing down corrupt men who thought themselves untouchable, or Sophie would be painted as a disturbed child exploiting her grandfather's memory. She thought about the rifle and its case, lying on the kitchen table. 3 more patterns, 3 more coordinates, each shot a statement. Each impact a question that demanded answers. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. Stop now, and your mother keeps her job. Continue, and you both lose everything. This is your only warning. Sophie deleted the text without responding. Threats meant fear, and fear meant they were worried. She set her alarm for 5:30. Tomorrow she'd need to be at Vasquez's house by 7 to go over final details before heading to the base. Sleep came eventually, fitful and filled with dreams of her grandfather. In them, he was teaching her to shoot, his hands steady on the rifle, his voice patient. Aim small, miss small, bug. And remember, sometimes the most important shot isn't the one that hits center mass. Sometimes it's the one that makes people pay attention. Sophie woke to her alarm in darkness. She dressed quickly in jeans and her one decent sweater, brushed her hair into a ponytail. In the kitchen, Laura was already up, making coffee with shaking hands. I didn't sleep, Laura admitted. Kept thinking about your grandpa. About what he'd say if he could see what's happening. He'd say we're doing the right thing. I hope so, baby. I really hope so. They ate breakfast in silence, neither hungry, but forcing down food anyway. Sophie cleaned her rifle, a ritual her grandfather had taught her. Every component checked, every surface wiped clean. The weapon had to be perfect. At 6:45, they drove through streets still dark with pre-dawn shadows. Laura's phone had been buzzing constantly since 5 a.m. Mrs. Sterling, demanding she come explain herself. Senator Sterling's aide, threatening legal action. Unknown numbers that Laura didn't answer. Vasquez's house blazed with lights. When they arrived, Mitchell's car was already there, along with two others Sophie didn't recognize. Inside, Vasquez had converted her dining room into a command center. Laptops open, phones charging, the base map spread across the table with the 5 coordinate locations circled in red. Mitchell introduced the newcomers. "This is Lieutenant Christopher Hunt from JAG, and this is Private Lisa Howard. They're here to help." Hunt was in his early 40s, with the careful eyes of someone trained to spot lies. "I reviewed the documents Captain Mitchell sent. If even half of this is accurate, we're looking at the biggest fraud case Fort Sterling has seen in decades." Private Howard looked nervous but determined. She was young, maybe 20, with the uncertain bearing of someone still new to the military. "I work in the equipment depot, Building 29, where one of the coordinates points. I've seen things that didn't make sense. Shipments that arrive but aren't logged. Inventory that disappears." She swallowed hard. "I'm willing to testify." Sophie felt something shift. These weren't just allies. These were people willing to risk everything for truth. Vasquez checked her watch. 0730. "We need to move. The range officially opens at 0800, and I want us there early." As they prepared to leave, Laura's phone rang again. This time she answered, putting it on speaker. Mrs. Sterling's voice was icy. "Laura, I'm giving you one final chance. Bring your daughter to our house immediately. We'll have a civilized conversation about this misunderstanding, and then everyone can move on with their lives." "What kind of conversation?" Laura asked, her voice steadier than Sophie expected. "The kind where you remember who pays your bills. The kind where you consider your daughter's future. Does she really want to be known as the girl who destroyed her grandfather's reputation with wild conspiracies?" Laura looked at Sophie, then at the people gathered in Vasquez's dining room, people who'd risked their careers and livelihoods for something bigger than themselves. "No, Mrs. Sterling," Laura said clearly. "I think we'll pass on that conversation. And you can consider this my resignation, effective immediately." She hung up before Madeline could respond. The room was silent. Then, Dorothy, who'd arrived minutes earlier with thermoses of coffee, started clapping. Others joined in, a small celebration of courage that felt bigger than the cramped space. "Well," Laura said, her voice shaking slightly, "I guess we're committed now." "We always were," Sophie replied. "We just finally said it out loud." They left for Fort Sterling in a convoy of 3 cars. Vasquez leading, Mitchell and Hunt following, Dorothy bringing up the rear with Laura and Sophie. The sun was rising as they approached the base, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The gate had triple the usual security. Private Rodriguez was there, along with 6 other MPs and a lieutenant Sophie didn't recognize. Rodriguez approached Laura's window, his expression apologetic. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to search your vehicle. Orders from the Provost Marshal." "Of course," Laura said calmly. They searched thoroughly, checking the trunk, under the seats, even the engine compartment. Found nothing except the rifle case and Sophie's backpack containing her grandfather's notes. The lieutenant examined Sophie's visitor pass, then looked at Vasquez's ID. "Master Sergeant, you're currently under investigation. Your base access is restricted." "My access is active until officially revoked in writing," Vasquez replied coolly. "Check your database." The lieutenant did, his frown deepening. "This will be reported." "I'm sure it will." They were waved through, but Sophie noticed the lieutenant immediately on his radio. Ahead, Fort Sterling was waking up. Soldiers on morning PT runs. Vehicles heading to early formations. And parked near the range complex, 3 news vans with satellite dishes extended. The media had arrived. The parking lot near the firing range complex was more crowded than Sophie had ever seen it. The 3 news vans had been joined by 2 more, their crews setting up cameras and checking equipment. Reporters stood in clusters, drinking coffee from thermoses and reviewing notes on tablets. Captain Melissa Vaughn stood near the range entrance, looking harassed. When she saw their convoy arrive, her expression shifted to something between relief and dread. Sophie climbed out of Dorothy's car, carrying the rifle case. The morning air was cold enough that her breath formed small clouds. She could hear the reporters noticing her, the sudden spike in their conversation volume. A woman in a red blazer approached, microphone in hand, cameraman trailing. Are you Sophie Dalton? I'm Sarah Jennings, Independent Military News. Can you tell us why you're here today? Before Sophie could answer, Vaughn intercepted. All media questions go through me. This is still a military installation with protocols. Jennings didn't back off. Is it true that Sophie's grandfather, Colonel Henry Dalton, died under suspicious circumstances 3 days after filing a fraud complaint? Vaughn's face went carefully blank. I have no information about that. Is it true that General Kingsley is under investigation for equipment procurement irregularities? No comment. Mitchell had joined them, still in civilian clothes since his access credentials had been suspended. He looked at Jennings. The investigation hasn't officially started yet, but it will. Vaughn shot him a warning glare, but the damage was done. The other reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. Vasquez took Sophie's arm, guiding her toward the range entrance. Ignore them. Focus on what you came to do. Inside the lobby, the atmosphere was tense. Staff Sergeant Frank Donovan, the range safety officer, stood with his arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Corporal Lee sat at the computer terminal, his fingers poised over the keyboard but not typing. And standing near the interior door, flanked by Colonel Bradley Winters and Lieutenant Colonel James Rutherford, was General Maxwell Kingsley. He wore his full dress uniform today, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights, every inch the decorated war hero. But his eyes were cold and calculating as they fixed on Sophie. Miss Dalton, Kingsley said with false warmth, I'm glad you could join us, though I see you've brought quite an entourage. Vasquez stepped forward. Sir, Sophie has authorized range access. We're here to complete her grandfather's memorial session. Of course, Kingsley's smile didn't waver. However, due to the increased media presence and security concerns, we've had to modify today's protocols. For everyone's safety, only essential personnel will be allowed in the range facility during live fire. Hunt spoke up, his JAG training evident in his measured tone. General, with respect, Colonel Dalton's dependent privileges don't include restrictions on observers. The regulations are quite clear. And I'm quite clear that I'm the base commander, Kingsley replied, his voice hardening. This is my installation, Lieutenant. Perhaps you'd like to review the chain of command. Before the confrontation could escalate, Senator Sterling entered through the main door, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits that screamed Washington lawyer. With them was Mrs. Sterling, immaculate and furious. Madeline Sterling's gaze found Laura immediately. How dare you resign over the phone? After everything we've done for you. Laura met her eyes without flinching. You mean after everything I've done for you? 12-hour days, holidays included, for wages that barely kept us fed. I think we're even. One of the lawyers stepped forward. Mrs. Dalton, I'm Richard Ashford, counsel for Senator Sterling. Your daughter's actions constitute harassment and defamation against my client. We're prepared to file a restraining order if this continues. On what grounds? Hunt asked sharply. She's exercising authorized base privileges and honoring her grandfather's memory. On the grounds that she's making baseless accusations about equipment fraud, Ashford replied. Accusations that damage Senator Sterling's reputation and interfere with his official duties. Mitchell pulled out his phone. You mean the accusations supported by 2 years of Colonel Dalton's documentation? The same documentation I've shared with 3 congressional oversight committees as of 6 a.m. this morning? The color drained from Sterling's face. You did what? My duty, sir. Mitchell's voice was ice. When presented with evidence of potential criminal activity, Army regulations require notification of appropriate authorities. I followed regulations. Kingsley's composure cracked slightly. Captain Mitchell, you are currently under investigation. Any actions you take are suspect. Then investigate, Mitchell replied calmly. My service record speaks for itself. Does yours, General? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Winters moved toward Mitchell, his hand on his sidearm, but Vasquez blocked his path. Touch him and I'll file assault charges so fast your head will spin, Vasquez said quietly. We're done being intimidated. Outside, the media had caught wind of the confrontation. Through the glass doors, Sophie could see cameras positioning for better angles. This was exactly what Kingsley wanted to avoid a public spectacle. Vaughn's phone was buzzing constantly. She answered, listened, her face tightening. Sir, I have Pentagon Public Affairs on the line. They're asking for a statement about the allegations spreading on social media. What should I tell them? Kingsley looked trapped. Every instinct probably screamed to shut this down, to drag everyone into closed offices where threats could be made privately. But with cameras rolling and journalists watching, heavy-handed tactics would only confirm guilt. "Tell them," Kingsley said slowly, "that we're conducting business as usual. Ms. Dalton is welcome to complete her memorial shooting under proper supervision." It was a calculated retreat, buying time. Sophie understood that. Whatever happened on the range today, Kingsley would already be planning his next move. Donovan stepped forward, his voice professionally neutral. "Miss Dalton, I'll be your safety officer today. Standard protocols apply. You'll shoot under my direct observation, with Master Sergeant Vasquez as secondary observer. And I'll be documenting everything," Lee added, holding up his tablet. "Complete digital record, uploaded to the central database in real time. No possibility of alteration or deletion." Kingsley's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Proceed." The group moved into the main range facility. The observation area had been expanded with additional chairs, clearly prepared for the VIP guests Kingsley had invited. But those seats were empty now. Instead, Lieutenant Hunt stood near the entrance with Private Howard, both positioned to witness everything. Dorothy had somehow convinced her way inside, claiming status as family friend. She stood next to Laura, her presence solid and reassuring. Sophie approached position 8. The first of the 3 remaining coordinates. Through the reinforced glass, she could see the 100-yard targets. The morning sun was higher now, burning off the last of the mist. Her grandfather's notes specified position 8, target 1, 100 yards. The pattern was a diamond shape, 4 points at compass positions with a 5th in the center. She set up the rifle with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over. Bipod down, scope adjusted, ammunition loaded. 5 federal 168-grain rounds, each one representing a piece of her grandfather's legacy. Donovan checked her setup with professional thoroughness. "Weapon is clear and properly configured. Shooter is ready when you are, Miss Dalton." The observation area had gone quiet. Even Kingsley had stopped pretending to review documents on his phone. Everyone was watching. Sophie settled into her shooting position. Through the scope, the target appeared sharp and clear. She began calculating the diamond pattern's points, translating her grandfather's coordinates into precise aiming adjustments. The first shot needed to hit high center, 12 o'clock position on the target face. She controlled her breathing, finding that perfect pause between inhale and exhale. Her finger pressed the trigger with steady pressure. The rifle fired. The recoil was familiar, almost comforting. On the monitor, a red dot appeared exactly where she'd aimed. "Hit, 12 o'clock, outer ring," Lee announced, logging the data. Sophie chambered the second round. This shot required placement at 3 o'clock, right side center. She adjusted and fired. "Hit, 3 o'clock position." The third shot, 6 o'clock, bottom center. The fourth, 9 o'clock, left side center. Each placement deliberate, each impact logged and uploaded. The fifth and final shot needed to hit dead center, completing the diamond pattern. Sophie took extra time with this one, ensuring perfect alignment. The rifle fired, the bullet striking precisely in the middle of the 4 compass points. On the monitor, the pattern was unmistakable. A perfect diamond, mathematically precise. Lee stared at the screen, then pulled up a reference file on his tablet. His eyes widened. That's the Fort Sterling Depot identification marker, the symbol used on all official storage facility diagrams. Vasquez moved closer to the monitor. Building 6 uses that marker. The main equipment depot, which was renovated 3 years ago, Private Howard spoke up, her voice shaking slightly but determined. $8 million in upgrades, climate-controlled storage, advanced security systems, biometric access. She paused. Except none of those systems actually work. The climate control was never installed. The security system is dummy cameras. The biometric scanners aren't even connected to power. Winters stepped forward, his face red. "That's classified information, Private. How dare you?" "How dare I tell the truth?" Howard's voice grew stronger. "I'm the one who maintains the logs, Colonel. I see what comes in and what goes out. Or what doesn't come in at all." She looked at Hunt. "I have documentation. Shipping manifests that don't match delivery receipts. Purchase orders for equipment that never arrived." Hunt pulled out a digital recorder. "Private Howard, are you willing to make an official statement?" "Yes, sir." Kingsley had gone very still, his eyes moving between Howard and the monitor displaying Sophie's diamond pattern. This is conspiracy theory nonsense. One disgruntled private and a child with a rifle don't constitute evidence. Then you won't mind when investigators examine Building 6, Hunt replied. Match the renovation invoices against the actual installed systems. Military facilities are classified. Not from congressional oversight committees, they're not. Mitchell held up his phone. And I'm currently on a conference call with a staffer from the Senate Armed Services Committee. They're very interested in these allegations. Senator Sterling had gone pale. His lawyer Ashford was typing furiously on his phone, probably alerting other lawyers that the situation was deteriorating. Sophie stood, leaving the rifle on the bench. 2 more patterns, General, position 9 and position 10. Are you going to let me shoot them, or are you going to prove everyone's suspicions by stopping me? It was a challenge, delivered with the quiet confidence her grandfather had taught her. Give them a choice where both options expose their guilt. Kingsley's smile was razor-thin. By all means, continue. I'm fascinated to see what other fantasies you'll project onto random bullet holes. They moved to position 9, set up for 250 yards. The target here was more challenging, further out and subject to wind drift. Sophie would need to account for environmental factors more carefully. Her grandfather's notes specified target 3 at this distance. The pattern was a star with 6 points hexagonal arrangement. As Sophie prepared the rifle, a commotion erupted in the lobby. Through the glass partition, she could see more people arriving. Army CID agents and windbreakers. 2 FBI agents in suits. And civilian investigators from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Vaughn was at the door, looking overwhelmed. General, we have federal investigators requesting access. They have warrants for documents related to equipment procurement. Kingsley's composure finally shattered. This is outrageous. You can't just waltz onto a military installation. Actually, we can, one of the FBI agents said, pushing past Vaughn. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and the weary confidence of someone who'd seen every variety of corruption. Special Agent Marcus Webb, we've been investigating defense contractor fraud for 6 months. Your name came up in relation to several shell companies, General. The second FBI agent, a woman named according to her credentials as Agent Patricia Brennan, held up a tablet. We received an anonymous tip this morning with extensive documentation. Financial records, email chains, falsified reports. Enough for multiple warrants. Anonymous tip, Kingsley said bitterly, looking at Mitchell. How convenient. Mitchell didn't deny it. I sent it to the FBI tip line at 5:30 this morning. Seemed like the right thing to do. The CID agents moved through the facility, accompanied by Hunt. One of them, a chief warrant officer with investigator credentials, approached Lee at the computer terminal. We'll need copies of all range logs from the past 3 years. Specifically, any sessions involving General Kingsley, Senator Sterling, or associated contractors. Lee's fingers flew over the keyboard. I can have that ready in 10 minutes. Would you also like the maintenance records for buildings 6, 14, 29, and the 2 others flagged in Colonel Dalton's complaint? You have those? Agent Webb asked sharply. I have everything, Lee replied. Colonel Dalton taught me that good record-keeping is a soldier's best defense. I've been keeping backups of all base equipment transactions for 4 years. He suggested it after I mentioned some irregularities I'd noticed. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. Her grandfather had been building a case for years, recruiting allies, preparing for this moment. She was just the final piece, the trigger that set everything in motion. Donovan touched her shoulder gently. Ready to continue, miss? Sophie nodded, wiping her eyes. She returned to position 9, settling into the shooting stance. Through the scope, the 250-yard target seemed impossibly distant. The star pattern required 6 shots, positioned at equal intervals around a center point. She'd practiced 6-shot groups before, but never at this distance, never under this pressure. The first shot hit at the 12 o'clock position of the imagined hexagon. The second at 2 o'clock. The third at 4 o'clock. Behind her, the investigators were questioning Winters and Rutherford. Both men had lawyers now, pulled from somewhere, everyone invoking rights and refusing to comment. Sterling was on his phone, his voice rising. I don't care what strings you have to pull, get me immunity. I'll give them Kingsley if they leave me alone. The loyalty among thieves was evaporating fast. Sophie fired the fourth shot 6 o'clock position, then the fifth at 8 o'clock. The sixth and final shot at 10 o'clock, completing the hexagonal star. On the monitor, the pattern emerged with mathematical precision. Lee checked it against reference materials, then whistled softly. That's the NATO Standardization Agreement symbol, used for marking equipment that meets international military specifications. Vasquez studied the monitor. Building 29 is designated as NATO-compliant storage, high-security facility for equipment that can be shared with Allied forces. Except the compliance certification was fraudulent, Private Howard added. The equipment stored there doesn't meet NATO standards. Some of it is substandard, purchased from unauthorized contractors at premium prices. Agent Brennan was recording this, her expression growing more intent. Can you prove that? I have inspection reports, Howard said. Real ones, not the doctored version submitted officially. Colonel Dalton helped me understand what to look for, how to document discrepancies. Kingsley was sinking, visibly. His shoulders had slumped, his face ashen. He looked at Sophie with something between hatred and grudging respect. Your grandfather was always 3 steps ahead. I should have known he'd train someone to finish what he started. He didn't train me to finish this, Sophie said quietly. He trained me to stand up for what's right. The finishing part just happened. Agent Webb approached Kingsley. General, I think we need to have a conversation, downtown, in a more formal setting. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but that could change rapidly depending on how cooperative you are. Webb gestured toward the door. Shall we? Kingsley looked around the range one last time, seeing his career and reputation disintegrating. Then he straightened his shoulders, found some reserve of military bearing and nodded. Let's get this over with. As the FBI agents escorted him out, Sterling tried to follow, but his own pair of investigators blocked his path. Senator, we also have questions about campaign contributions from the shell companies mentioned in the documentation. The lawyers were earning their fees now, huddling with Sterling and issuing rapid-fire instructions. Mrs. Sterling stood frozen, her perfect facade cracking. She looked at Laura with something that might have been pleading. You could have just kept cleaning my toilets, Madeline said, her voice breaking. None of this had to happen. Laura's response was calm, almost gentle. Yes, it did. Because people like you and your husband thought you were untouchable. Someone had to prove you weren't. Dorothy put an arm around Laura's shoulders. And someone did. Sophie had one pattern left. Position 10. Target 5. 325 yards. The longest shot her grandfather had specified. The final coordinate in his message. The observation area was chaos now, investigators everywhere, documents being collected, people being separated for questioning. But Sophie blocked it all out, focusing on the rifle and the target. This pattern was the most complex, an 8-pointed star representing the Army's value symbol. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. 8 values, 8 points. 8 shots at maximum effective range for her skill level. Donovan checked the range, ensuring it was clear. This is expert-level marksmanship, miss. If you're not comfortable... I'm comfortable, Sophie interrupted. My grandfather taught me this shot. I've made it before. Not often. Maybe a dozen times in 2 years of training. But she'd made it. She loaded 8 rounds into the rifle's magazine, the maximum it would hold. Through the scope, the target was a small rectangle, wavering slightly in heat mirage. The wind had picked up, flags along the range showing a steady 5-mile-per-hour breeze from the left. She'd need to compensate, aiming right of center to let the wind carry the bullet back to the target. The first shot, 12 o'clock position, high center. She adjusted for wind and distance, finding her natural respiratory pause. The rifle fired, the recoil familiar and manageable. On the monitor, after a brief delay as the system calculated the distant impact, a red dot appeared, high center, slightly right of where she'd aimed. The wind was stronger than she'd calculated. She adjusted her holdover for the remaining shots, compensating more aggressively for the breeze. The second shot, 1:30 position, the third at 3 o'clock, the fourth at 4:30. Sophie was halfway through the pattern, her concentration absolute. Each shot required recalculation, reading the wind, accounting for the subtle variations in her heartbeat and breathing. The 5th shot at 6 o'clock, bottom center. The 6th at 7:30. The 7th at 9 o'clock. 1 shot remaining, 10:30 position completing the 8-pointed star. She chambered the final round, feeling its weight, knowing this was the last bullet her grandfather had left her. After this, the ammunition case would be empty, his gift fully expended. But the pattern would be complete, the message delivered. She settled the crosshairs on the calculated point, adjusted for wind one last time, and pressed the trigger. The rifle fired. The bullet flew 325 yards, carried slightly by the wind, dropping predictably under gravity's pull, and struck the target. On the monitor, the 8th point appeared, completing the star. Lee was silent for a long moment, staring at the pattern. Then he pulled up his reference files again, cross-checking the coordinates. His face went pale. "That's Building 37, he said quietly. "The base commander's private storage facility." Everyone turned to look at him. "What's stored there?" Agent Webb asked, his interest sharpened. Lee looked at the investigators, then at Sophie, then back at his screen. "According to official records, nothing. It's listed as a decommissioned structure awaiting demolition." He paused. "But I've seen trucks there at night, deliveries that aren't logged anywhere." Private Howard nodded slowly. "I was told never to go near Building 37, that it was contaminated, unsafe. But I've seen lights there, activity after hours." Agent Brennan was already on her phone. "I need a warrant for Building 37 at Fort Sterling. Yes, right now. Suspected evidence storage." She listened, then smiled coldly. "Judge Harper signed it? Excellent. We're moving immediately." The CID agents mobilized, coordinating with base security. Within minutes, a convoy of vehicles was racing toward the far corner of the base where Building 37 sat, isolated and forgotten. Sophie stood, her legs shaky from adrenaline and the physical strain of precision shooting. Laura rushed forward, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You did it, baby," Laura whispered. "You finished it." Vasquez approached, her eyes bright with emotion she'd normally never show. "Your grandfather would be proud, Sophie." "Hell, I'm proud." Mitchell had his phone out, recording everything. "The patterns are complete. All 5 coordinates documented and uploaded to the central database. Timestamped, verified, impossible to alter." Hunt was making notes, his lawyer's mind already preparing the prosecution case. "We have documentary evidence, witness testimony, and now physical locations to investigate. This is going to be the biggest military fraud case in a decade." Outside, the media had caught wind of the developments. Reporters were broadcasting live, cameras capturing investigators entering and leaving the range facility, senior officers being escorted to vehicles. Sarah Jennings managed to get close to Sophie, her cameraman filming. "Sophie, can you tell us what you've accomplished today?" Sophie looked at the camera, thinking about her grandfather's final words to her. She'd been scared to come here, terrified of the powerful men who'd killed him, but fear hadn't stopped her, because he taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. "I finished what my grandfather started," Sophie said clearly. "He discovered that people in power were stealing from the soldiers who serve, lying about equipment, putting lives at risk for profit. He tried to expose it through official channels, and they killed him for it." She paused, letting the words land. "But he made sure the truth would come out anyway. He taught me to shoot, taught me to be brave, and left me the coordinates that would prove everything." "What happens now?" Jennings asked. "Now justice happens. Real justice, not the kind that powerful people buy." The interview was interrupted by Agent Webb returning, his expression grim but satisfied. "Building 37 is full of stolen equipment, night vision systems, tactical optics, communications gear, millions of dollars worth, all marked for overseas sale. We've got them dead to rights." The investigation spread through Fort Sterling like wildfire. By noon, 7 people had been taken into custody, including General Kingsley, Senator Sterling, Colonel Winters, and Lieutenant Colonel Rutherford. More arrests were expected. Sophie sat in Vasquez's office, exhausted but unable to rest. Her mother was there, and Dorothy, and Mitchell, and Hunt. The people who'd stood with her when standing meant risking everything. Vasquez handed her a Coke from the small refrigerator she kept in her office. "You should eat something." "Not hungry." "Eat anyway. You're running on adrenaline, and when it crashes you'll need fuel." Dorothy produced sandwiches from somewhere, distributing them with grandmotherly efficiency. Made them this morning, figured you'd all need proper food. They ate in companionable silence, watching through the office window as investigators continued their work. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage for the evening broadcasts. Hunt's phone rang. He listened for several minutes, his expression growing more animated. When he hung up, he was smiling. That was the Judge Advocate General's office. They're fast-tracking the investigation. Full court-martial proceedings for the military personnel, federal prosecution for the civilians. Timeline? Mitchell asked. Months, maybe a year. These cases are complex. Hunt looked at Sophie. You'll need to testify. Are you prepared for that? Sophie thought about facing Kingsley in a courtroom, about reliving everything under cross-examination. It would be hard, scary even, but necessary. I'll testify, she said. I'll tell them everything. Vasquez's phone buzzed. She checked it, her eyebrows rising. I'm being reinstated, full privileges, effective immediately, and… She read further, a rare smile crossing her face. I'm being commended for my assistance in uncovering the fraud. Recommended for promotion. Congratulations, Master Sergeant, Mitchell said. Well deserved. What about you? Vasquez asked. You sacrificed more than anyone. Mitchell shrugged. I'm still under investigation, technically, but my lawyer says the case against me will probably be dropped once the full scope of Kingsley's corruption comes out, and even if it's not, I can live with myself. Can't say that about a lot of officers these days. Laura's phone had been silent for hours, the threatening calls having stopped. Now it buzzed with a text. She read it, her expression shifting to surprise. It's from an attorney, Laura said. Someone named Carla Simmons. She says she represents families affected by the equipment fraud. She wants to know if we'd be interested in a civil suit. Dorothy leaned over to read the screen. Simmons is good, handled the case against that defense contractor in Texas, won a huge settlement. I don't want money from this, Laura said quietly. That's not why we did it. But you deserve compensation, Hunt argued. Your father died investigating this fraud. Sophie was threatened. You lost your job. The law recognizes that harm. Sophie thought about the trailer they lived in, the constant struggle to pay bills, her mother's worn hands from years of cleaning. Money wouldn't bring her grandfather back, but it would give them security, options, a future without fear. Talk to the lawyer, Sophie said. See what she says. Laura nodded slowly, already composing a response to the text. The afternoon wore on. Investigators continued their work, building cases that would take months to fully prosecute. Sophie gave a formal statement to the CID, recounting everything from her grandfather's final days to the shooting demonstrations. By 4 o'clock, the media circus had died down to a manageable level. The news crews had their footage, their interviews, their dramatic shots of a military base in crisis. Vaughn appeared in Vasquez's office, looking exhausted. I've been handling press inquiries for 6 hours straight. Do you know how many ways reporters can ask the same question? Approximately infinite, Mitchell offered. Close enough. Vaughn looked at Sophie. You become quite famous, you know. The 12-year-old who brought down a general. Social media is calling you the youngest whistleblower in military history. Sophie didn't feel famous. She felt tired, overwhelmed, and slightly scared of what came next. How long before this dies down? Laura asked. Weeks, probably, Vaughn said. Maybe months. This story has everything. Corruption, cover-ups, a dead hero, a brave kid. It's going to be national news for a while. Dorothy patted Sophie's shoulder. Better get used to attention, honey. You're going to be fielding interview requests for the foreseeable future. As the sun began setting, casting long shadows across Fort Sterling, Agent Webb returned one final time. He looked satisfied, the expression of someone who'd closed a major case. I wanted to thank you personally, Webb said to Sophie. Cases like this, they're hard to crack. People in power protect each other, hide evidence, intimidate witnesses. But you didn't back down. He paused. Your grandfather chose well when he trusted you with this. He didn't really have a choice, Sophie replied. I was all he had. No, he had a choice. He could have taken his evidence to his grave, let the corruption continue. Instead, he trained his granddaughter to be brave enough to finish the fight. Webb smiled. That took faith. In you, and in the idea that justice still matters. After Webb left, Vasquez drove Sophie and Laura back to their trailer. The sun had fully set now, stars emerging in the clear sky. The parking lot looked the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different. Inside, the trailer felt smaller somehow. Or maybe Sophie felt bigger, changed by the day's events in ways she was still processing. Laura collapsed on the couch, her energy finally depleted. "I can't believe we actually did it." "We had help," Sophie reminded her. "True, but we started it. We made the choice to fight back." Laura looked at her daughter. "I'm sorry I doubted you this morning. Sorry I almost made us go to Ohio." "You were scared. That's normal." "But you weren't. Or you were and you did it anyway." Laura's eyes were wet. "When did you get so brave, baby?" "Grandpa taught me. He said being scared just means you understand the risks. Being brave means you act anyway." They sat in silence for a while, processing everything. Outside, the trailer park was quiet. Families settling in for the evening. Normal life continuing around them even though their world had fundamentally shifted. Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from Private Price. "You're a legend on base. Everyone's talking about what you did. Your grandfather would be proud." Another text, this one from Captain Mitchell. "Thank you for giving me the courage to do the right thing. I forgot what that felt like." And one from Vasquez. "Sleep well tonight, Sophie. You've earned it. Tomorrow we start rebuilding." But Sophie knew rebuilding had already started. It started the moment she decided to honor her grandfather's final request, to shoot the patterns he'd left, to ask the questions nobody wanted answered. 3 days later, Sophie and Laura stood in Fort Sterling's Memorial Chapel. The building was small but elegant, with wooden pews and stained glass windows depicting military service and sacrifice. A memorial service was being held for Colonel Henry Dalton, properly this time. The initial funeral had been rushed, barely attended. This one was different. The chapel was full. Soldiers in dress uniform, veterans from her grandfather's old units, strangers who'd read about him in the news and wanted to pay respects. Vasquez was there in her full dress blues, standing at attention near the front. Mitchell sat with other officers who'd served under Colonel Dalton over the years. Private Howard attended with her family, looking nervous but determined. Even Lieutenant Hunt came, representing the JAG office, honoring a man who'd sacrificed everything for honor and integrity. The chaplain, Major Thomas Brennan, spoke about Colonel Dalton's service. 3 tours overseas, multiple combat decorations, 30 years of exemplary duty. But he also spoke about the courage it took to stand against corruption, to risk everything for truth. Colonel Dalton could have retired quietly, Brennan said. Could have enjoyed his final years without stress or danger. Instead, he chose to fight one more battle against an enemy that wore friendly uniforms. He chose honor over safety, truth over comfort. Sophie sat in the front pew between her mother and Dorothy, holding the folded flag that had draped her grandfather's casket. It was heavy, that triangle of cloth, weighted with meaning and sacrifice. When the service ended, people approached to offer condolences. Many shared stories about Colonel Dalton, his mentorship, his integrity, his dry sense of humor. An older man in a general's uniform introduced himself as retired Major General Robert Hayes, former commander of Fort Sterling. "Your grandfather served under me for 6 years. Best NCO I ever had. When I heard what he'd uncovered, what it cost him." Hayes paused, emotion tightening his voice. "The Army failed him. We should have protected him, should have listened when he raised concerns. I'm sorry for that." "He wouldn't want apologies," Sophie said. "He'd want you to make sure it doesn't happen again." Hayes nodded gravely. "I've been called to testify before Congress. I intend to recommend systemic reforms to procurement oversight. Your grandfather's death will mean something." As the crowd dispersed, Sophie walked to the small memorial garden behind the chapel. Her mother gave her space, understanding the need for private goodbye. The garden was peaceful, with flowering bushes and a stone bench overlooking a small pond. Sophie sat, clutching the flag, and finally let herself cry. She cried for her grandfather, for the time they'd lost, for the lessons she'd never receive. She cried from exhaustion and relief, and the overwhelming weight of what she'd accomplished. But underneath the grief was something else, pride. Her grandfather had trusted her with his final mission, and she'd completed it. She'd been brave when being brave meant risking everything. She'd stood tall when powerful people tried to make her small. "I did it, Grandpa," she whispered to the quiet garden. "I shot all 5 patterns. I told your story. They're going to pay for what they did to you." A breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of flowers. Sophie chose to interpret it as approval. Laura found her there 20 minutes later, sitting quietly with the flag folded in her lap. "You okay, baby?" "Yeah, I think I am." They walked back to Dorothy's car together, leaving the chapel and its memories behind. The drive home was quiet but not uncomfortable, each of them lost in thought. At the trailer, a package waited on the small porch. It was addressed to Sophie, sent from a law firm in Virginia. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter explained that Colonel Dalton had established a small trust fund years ago to be given to Sophie upon his death. It wasn't much, just enough for college tuition and living expenses. But attached was a note in her grandfather's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before he died. "Bug, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you finished what I started. I'm proud of you, though I won't be there to say it. This money is for your education. Learn everything you can. Be smarter than the men who think power makes them untouchable. Be braver than the people who choose comfort over truth. Be better than I was. Love always, Grandpa." Sophie read the note 3 times, memorizing every word. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her grandfather's rifle case, alongside the empty ammunition box and the spent brass from her final shooting session. These were her inheritance. Not just money or a rifle, but a legacy of courage and integrity. 1 week later, the first arrests became public. General Kingsley was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Senator Sterling faced federal corruption charges. Colonel Winters and Lieutenant Colonel Rutherford were awaiting courts-martial. 3 defense contractors had been indicted. 2 shell companies dissolved, their assets frozen pending investigation. The total estimated fraud exceeded $30 million over 7 years. Sophie watched the news coverage with her mother, seeing Kingsley being led from a courthouse in handcuffs. The proud general was gone, replaced by a man who looked small and defeated. "Do you feel satisfied?" Laura asked. Seeing him like that? Sophie thought about it. "Not satisfied exactly, but I feel like justice is happening. That's different." Laura smiled. "Your grandfather would say the same thing." The lawyer, Carla Simmons, had taken their case. She was confident they'd win substantial compensation from both the government for negligence and from the contractors for their role in the fraud. "We're talking millions," Simmons had explained in their last meeting. "Your father's death directly resulted from uncovering this conspiracy. The civil liability is clear. Money couldn't replace her grandfather, but it would ensure Sophie could attend any college she wanted, that Laura would never have to scrub another toilet unless she chose to." Life began settling into a new normal. Sophie returned to school, where she was treated like a celebrity. Some kids wanted autographs. Others avoided her, made uncomfortable by her sudden fame. But her real friends stayed close. They didn't treat her differently, just asked if she was okay and invited her to normal 12-year-old activities. Sophie appreciated the normalcy. She'd had enough drama for a lifetime. 2 months after the shooting demonstration, Sophie received an invitation to speak at a congressional hearing on military procurement reform. She was terrified but accepted. Standing before the committee, reading her prepared statement about her grandfather's investigation and subsequent death, Sophie felt the weight of responsibility, but also the strength that came from knowing she'd done the right thing. The congressmen and women listened intently, several taking notes. When she finished, the committee chair thanked her for her courage and promised comprehensive reform legislation. Whether those promises materialized remained to be seen, but at least the conversation was happening. 3 months after everything began, on a cool autumn morning, Sophie and Laura drove back to Fort Sterling one final time, not to the firing range, but to the memorial garden behind the chapel. A new plaque had been installed, honoring Colonel Henry Dalton. It read, "In memory of Colonel Henry Viper Dalton, who served with honor, lived with integrity, and died defending both. His courage exposed corruption and inspired reform. A true soldier to the end." Sophie placed flowers at the plaque's base, yellow roses that had been her grandfather's favorite. "We're doing okay, Grandpa," she said softly. "Mom's taking online classes to become a paralegal. I'm on the honor roll. We moved out of the trailer into a real apartment with 2 bathrooms." She smiled. "You'd like it. There's even a porch where I can practice whittling like you taught me." Laura stood beside her daughter, her hand on Sophie's shoulder. "We miss you, Dad. Every day, but we're gonna be fine. Sophie made sure of that. They stood in silence for a while, the autumn breeze carrying leaves across the garden. Then Sophie straightened, giving the plaque a final look. "Ready to go home?" Laura asked. "Yeah, I'm ready." As they walked back to the car, Sophie felt lighter somehow. The weight of her grandfather's final mission had been carried, the burden shared and ultimately lifted. She'd never forget what happened, the fear and courage and cost of standing up to power. But she'd also never regret it. Because in the end, her grandfather had been right. Sometimes the dirt got too deep to just scrub away. Sometimes you had to clean the slate entirely. And sometimes a 12-year-old girl with a rifle and the truth was exactly what the world needed. The story of Sophie Dalton and her grandfather's legacy spread far beyond Fort Sterling. It became a case study in military ethics courses, a cautionary tale about unchecked power, and an inspiration for those who believed one person could make a difference. But for Sophie, it was simpler than that. It was about promises kept, courage found, and honor preserved. It was about a grandfather who trusted his granddaughter to finish what he started, and a girl who refused to let him down. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.